Temos a honra de ter connosco não só a Sofia Hernandes Choi, que muitos de vós penso que conhecem, que foi a curadora do que foi esta exposição Artes and Metal Constance, mas sobretudo o prazer enorme e a honra de ter a historiadora de arquitetura e curadora Marina Otero Bercier. Muchas gracias, Marina. Y como fácilmente, como he dicho muchas veces, aquí en el pabellón se practica una especie de locura de Torre Babel. Hablamos todo de todos, y en portuñol, en español, en inglés, portugués, francés, lo que se hable. Hoy la conversación va a ser en español, ¿no?
Sí, no sé. ¿Qué quiere la...?
Habíamos pensado que podía ser en español o en inglés.
Whatever you prefer. ¿Inglés?
¿Inglés?
O-
¿Sí? En
Sí.
inglés, ¿sí? Siempre si hay al menos una persona que dice, we'll do it in English. Yeah? And if there needs to be a translation, we say it in Spanish again.
Okay.
Okay. So therefore it will be in English, but of course in the end, if someone puts a question in Portuguese or
Yeah.
español o
Sí.
lo que sea, hablamos.
Ok.
Lo importante es que estamos aquí para poder escuchar y muchas gracias una vez más por venir.
Gracias, Isabel. Y gracias a todos por estar aquí. Gracias, Marina, por acompañarnos.
¿En inglés?
Así como dice...
¿Vamos a hacerlo en inglés o en español?
sí, we will do it in English, of course. So Marina, as Isabel well said, is a curator and an architectural historian, and we got to meet when she was a director of the New Institute in Rotterdam for 7 years, leading the research program of this beautiful museum that focuses on architecture, design, and new media. And she left immediately then winning the Wheeler Prize around a research from Harvard University around a research that focuses on the best ways to think about the architecture of data centers and the way in which data centers have an effect, of course, on ecology or climate change, to say more specifically. And Marina has been traveling all over the world to do research, not just on buildings under construction that will host data centers, but also the possible ways that we could think about building them better to improve the climate. But regardless of that research, she has been doing many different things that I understand less because of the complexity of the science, but that I come to understand very much because of the way she has been experimenting with more sensual forms of presentation. So less about didactics and information and more about experiments that are between exhibition design and art making and that present new research and new findings in beautiful ways, I would say. So she is the one that I thought was the best person to come and speak to the interest of an artist, Fernanda Frajateiro, who's accompanying us when I told her about the series of public programs that we would be doing as part of the exhibition. Fernanda suggested that we bring to Lisbon someone that could speak about art and architecture. And we explored one possibility that Fernanda brought to the table, and then I made a counter proposal to think about Marina as someone to speak about art and architecture. And this has to do especially in light of the invitation that I made to every artist in the exhibition to participate in some kind of program where there would be a public engagement or a public experience. So here in the gallery right now we have Joana Bastos, Fernanda Frajateiro, Alejandro Sarco, and Gabriel Curi, who will be doing programs this week. Yay! And Fernanda has proposed 2 programs, and one of them is this, I would say, and the second one will take place in February, which is with SIA Architectures. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But ultimately, the proposal of Fernanda was really to think about, instead of her speaking about this intersection of art and architecture, to be thinking about how can we think about architecture from the position of the arts or elsewhere. It is the case for those that came to the program with Juan Araujo, which was the first of the events that we did. He also did a whole presentation around art and architecture, much more pictorial, I would say, based around his own research of an of a home turned museum. And today what I discussed with Marina was to do a dialogue about certain projects that I've heard her talk about or that I've seen images. I said, why don't we make this conversation public so that not only I, but all together can learn about these projects and how they relate to in some way, not just to contemporary art, but to some of the connections with Portugal or with the work of Fernanda. So thank you, Marina, for agreeing to this. If you, Marina has been flying around all over the world to do her research, but also to give a series of conferences that have been very applauded because they present also the research not only on data centers, but the long-standing work that she's done on lithium. See? But today we will start with a conversation, and I wanted us, for Marina to talk a little bit about her latest project that she did in Venice, which relates to Fernanda's work to the extent that we're going to hear about in February, because the main commissioner of this project is
Cardinal José Tolentino de Mendoza.
Cardinal José Tolentino. So there is, I don't think that it's coincidental. I think that it has to do with Cardinal Tolentino's very strategic way of identifying people that he wants to commission projects as part of his position in the Vatican, but also the way in which he is able to create change in his native Portugal. So Marina was part of the Bienal de Venecia's architecture in two different modalities, and the first one that we would like for her to tell us a little bit, to introduce us, is what you did actually in the Venice Biennale. What was the commission that Tolentino assigned you and a group of architects to work on?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sophia, and everyone in the institution for the invitation. And congratulations to all the artists participating. It's an incredible exhibition. So it was a bit of a surprise because it was January last year, and I was in Spain and about to go to the US to teach. I spent almost half of the year in the US, and I received a call from Ana Punjaner, is an architect from Mayo Architects in Barcelona. And she said, Marina, I'm going to propose something to you. It's a bit crazy, but I hope you agree. We would like to have you on board. Would you be interested in curating the Vatican Pavilion? I was like, what? I was like, I never expected that invitation. So what happened is Cardinal Tolentino has been, appointed to lead the participation of the Vatican in the Venice Biennial for already 2 years. The first one was quite an impressive work for the art biennial that was inside a prison, women's prison. And that diverts very much from the type of work that the Vatican was presenting in Venice. And it was very risky, very social-oriented, and the thinking behind was that architecture should not be about flashy buildings, but actually around social, ecological relations. So he assembled a few people, Tatiana Bilbao, a Mexican architect, very, very famous. Tatiana invited these Mayo architects from Barcelona, and they needed a curator, and they proposed my name. And Tolentino did his research, and he's like, okay, stamped, let's call Marina. I thought it was crazy because it was January, and the pavilion was opening in April. And I was also unsure of what would be my position in that kind of,
constellation.
But I said yes, because it was strange enough, challenging, and I have heard about Tolentino as an intellectual, a person that is very sophisticated thinker, and I like to take risks and work with unexpected groups of people, because I think sometimes when you put together very unlikely groups is when things happen. So the idea was that the Vatican Pavilion, the Vatican has is going to be working in the same building for a few years, and the building is in Venice, in this Castello, but it's outside the Giardini, and it's a building that it was formerly a church, but it's desacralized and has been abandoned for a while because of flooding that happened a few years ago. So this is the state of the building. And what we proposed as a group was to think about repair, but not repair as fixing the cracks of the building. Instead, thinking about tending to these cracks and these, signs of aging of the buildings as moments of transformation that show the life of that building that has happened over centuries. And thinking about architecture, like thinking about Fernanda's work, not only the work of a single architect or even a group of architects, but rather everyone who lives in that building over time and takes care of that building, maintains it, and transforms it. People, but sometimes even insects, spiders, the salt of the lagoon, and many other creatures. So we decided to take a name from Umberto Eco, Opera Aperta, to say, well, the work of architecture is also an open work, that actually we have such a little time and we are so many people that this work doesn't belong to any of us. No one is in the lead necessarily. We don't know each other so well. We also want to work with as many people in the city as possible. So actually, no one holds one narrative for this project. It's a collective narrative, and we have to embrace that openness. And that's how we started to work. Well, we were 2 curators, 2 groups of architects, then a series of associations that, we conducted a lot of conversations in Venice, and we started working with Lares, who are restorers, professional restorers, a space that provides, food, the music, the conservatory, the university, and, many, many other people. What we did, we understanding the building and all its different surfaces, changes, inhabitants. We talked to everyone, the neighbors, the associations around, people who were protesting the usage of the space by the Vatican, everyone. And what the idea, basically, was that the main project was the restoration, the repair. But the idea of repair was not only repairing the building, but repairing the relations that perhaps were broken because the building was closed and no one was currently part of the life of the building. So we thought that the restoration of the walls and the structure, the surfaces, had to go hand in hand with the restoration of the social, ecological relations that are around. And for that, we have to open the building while it was being restored. And that was a challenge because we have to ask for licenses, and this is not in the Giardini, it's not inside the Venice Biennial, it's outside. So the licenses that we need are the normal building, normal construction work. So we have to be very strategic, almost like ninja, trying to ask for licenses to just do this little thing, and this other little thing, and this other, and this summatory of things, so we could keep it open. And this is what we did.
Open to the public.
Open to the public, and more than open to the public, because we don't want this to be just a performative act. We wanted it to be an active space of rehearsal of many different things. So I show you a few images. how the building was until the end of November. And what you see, we did just a very simple gesture. We covered the building because of the type of legislation. You know, we have to protect the building. We only opened windows in the surfaces, like with this fabric we unveil, where we are working. So we are working in the main altar, and it's been restored because it's been eaten completely by the salt of the lagoon, that actually you touch the marble and just dissolves. And so we just roll up the fabric in the places where we work. The same with the floor. We cover all the floor with wood, and only in the places where we are restoring the terrazzo. This is not even a wood terrazzo. It's like from the 60s and 70s. But we also have to take care of materials that are not so noble. So again, you see the place where we are working at the moment. And then we work with the light. In order to have white light to illuminate the place where workers are working, we had to make the contrast with the other light. So there is a overall yellow, so the other one is white. And so that's only the elements that we work with. And with that, we opened during many months, from May to November, this building. But at the same time, there were many other activities. So the idea was, okay, there are gonna be people restoring the altar, but these people will need to stop at some point and have lunch. So we need a kitchen. So we collaborated with an association that provides food and collaborates with different groups in the city that are different social endeavors, supporting different groups in the city. So we have the open table. So it was for the construction workers, the people using the pavilion, but also any other visitor could sign up and have lunch together with everyone in that table. So we have also people like these gondoleros. But at the same time, we say, okay, we have the Lares, that is these professionals restoring the altar. But so many people is interested in taking care of their own buildings and learning how to tend to your immediate environment. So why don't we do workshops for everyone interested in learning how to restore? So we collaborated with the University of Venice to run this workshop on restoration that were for like a bit more, specific, others very general, other for kids, other for, and everything was completely free and open to everyone. So this is what we organized. These workshops where different techniques for restoration were happening every week, twice a week.
And those were done with the University of Workshops.
The university was running them, but then everyone can sign up. And then there will be schools, but also you are a visitor in Venice, you can sign up, but you're a neighbor, you can go. It was open for everyone. And then there was something that at the beginning I was like, no, this is too much. But talking with many people in the city, we met with musicians from the Conservatory of Music. Mm-hmm. And they said that they didn't have spaces for rehearsal in the city, that in a city like Venice, it's very difficult first to find the spaces for, you find a place that you can use to play, but also they didn't have the good instruments to do so. So we talked with the conservatory, and they lent us 3 amazing instruments, a pianoforte, and another that I don't remember the name in English. And so these were available for the musicians, the students in the conservatory, but also to anyone who will sign up. So you could play the piano in this amazing place for 2 hours, anyone. And so sometimes you will enter in the building, there will be the construction workers repairing the altar, someone playing the piano, the kitchen open, someone in a workshop. It was like a complete mess, but at the same time so beautiful, like a very, very intense and a special place. We didn't know how it will play out, and we thought that maybe it will not work out, but it did.
I like it very much. Also, the idea of the title, which I hadn't reflected upon, of the open open work of Umberto Eco and in this case, Opera Aperta, but also the connection that you made when we looked at first the images of the exhibition and again of Fernanda's work, then a connection that you made between this exhibition and Architecture Without Architects of Bernard Grotowski, where there is an emphasis, like Marina said at the start, is that it's not about the building, but it's about everyone that makes up the building and that develops its history as well as the spaces over time. So I think that that's a very beautiful connection that you made and that we could see here. And for those that don't know, I actually only knew about that very popular Tolentino commission of the first Biennale of Contemporary Art, which was last year. It was a very successful pavilion, and it was here only a month or 2 months ago at the studio of Fernanda, where I got a full introduction on Tolentino and who he was and the ways in which the Cardinal had been helping to bridge different communities or different sectors, the art sector with the prison sector, which is one of the projects that Fernanda will be speaking just very briefly in February, so in a couple of months. But there will also be another project that Fernanda will discuss in development with SIA Architects that relates very much to this idea of participation, where the people making, not the restoration, but in this case the construction, are also actively participating in the staging of the project. And I think that what's beautiful here is not just that it's all happening, but that the partnerships are local, meaning everyone in a way has a different participation in the project from abroad, but that all the siting of the project is being done during the exhibition process with the participation of the local partners and the local audiences. So children, like things that are not typically, I would say, associated at all with Venice as a biennale that's an international exhibition. So I really like the, very much also in a very different and small scale, the idea that in this exhibition we are having programs within the gallery and not just staging the project, so that you put your resources in developing the conversation of public engagement and not just in the staging of the work.
Yeah, no, I think for us it was very important that even the guides of the exhibition were students from different universities, and the conversation that we had with them is like, okay, this is what we think about the project, but you don't have to repeat the same. You have to explain it on your own way, and perhaps you just speak about a part of the project that resonates with you, with your own experience. So what I like is no one hold the project too tight. So no one owned the project. It was something that it was very complex, very alive, and you can just like understand part of it, but everyone was equally sharing the responsibility, holding that space. That's quite unique. I mean, I have to say, for me, it was easy to be a bit like, have a distance and think about, when at the beginning the idea was to repair it and do something else. And it was, no, to repair that's it, you know.
That the idea of repair, interesting because that's also the idea, say, an artist like Caderabia. For him, repair has to do with it begins with the amputations in the First World War, and then it goes up onto questions around repatriation today, no? But what I wanted to say is that repair, in your case, it is not about a remedy, but instead of an activation of maintenance that is there. I like that very, very much, no?
Yeah.
I also think that it's quite interesting, the fact that the issues of labor are being exposed, you know? And that in connection to the work of Joana Bastos is something that I find quite a nice connection, is that the labor is the work, meaning that the labor is the exhibition and that staging is there. But I want us to transition into something that you also mentioned when we were talking about the distinctions between one project and another. Marina was telling me that in this exhibition, she talked about mediation right now, but she also said that there was little to no didactics in the show. didactics that it would explain or introduce you, but that the importance was placed on the activities, so that when you entered and visited the space, you would see all these activities happening, and you would feel, to some extent, make it possible to join into a lunch, to join into the concert, meaning that that you didn't have to explain things to an audience, that the audience visiting would be feeling some of the changes, which Marina pointed out was a strong distinction between this pavilion that she curated for the Vatican to the pavilion that she curated years ago for the Netherlands, the Dutch pavilion, also in the Venice Biennale. And that pavilion, she said, in contrast to this, was also interactive, but at the same time was full of didactics. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the,
Yeah.
I like these connections very much, that when you look at your projects, instead of saying like toot, 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 that you do them in conversation so that you're able to link things and to disconnect them. So tell us about the Dutch pavilion.
Architects,
From the Vatican to the Dutch, that's the
when
most
we-
Protestant, no, from the Catholic.
Exactly. Yeah. When we do I'm generalizing, but architectural exhibitions tend to be a bit didactic.
Yeah.
And I'm part of that. Overly ambitious intellectually, trying to say a lot. And I had an anecdote. The first big exhibition that I did was the Oslo Triennale, 2016, with a group of friends. We were curating it. And I think it was an important exhibition. I think still people think and remembers it was called After Belonging. But we had a review in The Guardian, and the critic in The Guardian said, well, the exhibition, the projects are very interesting, but the work of the curators is, all the text looks like it has been written with a bullshit generator. And I looked for the bullshit generator.
I thought it was a metaphor.
No.
Like,
Yeah, at least it was online a few, so you can just write something and it will put it in the jargon of art, contemporary art, intellectual thinking, something like that.
Did anyone know about this? So it's like a chat GPT, but
But
for jargon field.
So I tested it and it was quite accurate, and I was like, oh wow. So since then I was trying to convey meaning without necessarily overloading with information, trying the work to, and this is very obvious for artists. So I feel like saying something that is very basic, but that's not the training that we have. And so when I curated the Dutch pavilion, that was in 2018, so it was after Oslo. So I already had the bullshit generator. So I said, okay, I have to do something. I still want to say so much because this project is about...
When you do a lot of research, you want to say so much.
Exactly. I did a lot of research about the relation between work and leisure. Like the project is called Work, Body, Leisure. And it was about the relations between, how the Netherlands is a place for labor and it's organized around labor, and what other imaginations are. So I did my best. So when you enter in the exhibition, you will see this grid. So there was this moment of just being there, and something that was not charged with information, but it was very information rich. So to me, this was somehow the Netherlands with this Cartesian landscape where everyone fits, but as long as you are
In the mold.
in the mold. Huh? And this is what you will learn. At the beginning, no one knew what to do with this, so a few people understood that sometimes you could open a few of those, and those will open other worlds that will be behind the grid. And behind the grid, you will find different episodes of the history of the Netherlands around these questions, from Constant, a new Babylon, this idea of the world as organized around play and leisure, or the automation that was happening in the Netherlands with technologies, automated technologies taking over greenhouses and the port, or this moment of Yoko Ono and John Lennon talking about, the idea of not being productive, doing the performance in the Hilton Hotel, here with Hans Ulrich Chobrits, Madelon, and Beatriz Colomina, and this is Nicolas Hirsch, and the widow of Constant. Simone Nikhil talking about exhaustion, but also perspective in the construction of the space. But obviously I did this one-to-one spaces, but I couldn't help myself. So I put the rest of all the research, I put it in the rest of the lockers. So it was like, I tried to summarize the research in 2 lines. Every room only had 2 lines that will explain the concept behind it. But then I use the rest of the spaces, like I have to show I've been working a lot.
And I think that it's a nice project to discuss not just a question around mediation. And in the screen, just so you know, it looks like yellow, but in reality it's very orange, which
It's
is
very
a
orange.
color of orange is a color of the Netherlands, like they're associated to the orange. And in this case, the Dutch have a pavilion within the Giardini,
Yeah,
which
this
is
was-
just on the left. It's next to the Belgian, and it's just on the left of the main Biennale pavilion, no, on the
Yeah,
main
it's a bit-
exhibition space.
Next to Spain and Belgium and next to the Italian pavilion.
Yeah, next to the Italian pavilion. So I think that one of the things that I also thought would be interesting to mention here is that in the case of this work leisure or body work leisure of the Dutch pavilion that Marina curated, it's also very much related, strangely, but really, to the work of Céline Condorelli that's in the exhibition, which you could find the 2 collages that are there. And what I was telling Marina in this conversation of going and looking back at her work and also trying to make these connections in terms of the way in which artists in the exhibition, including Fernanda or Céline, for example, I mentioned also Juan Araujo, that they work with architecture history, that they've worked with buildings, that they've collaborated with architects. In the case of Céline Condorelli, and she may have talked about this at length last weekend, I'm not sure, you will tell me, she made a whole body of work for over a decade, in fact, on research by Aldo van Eyck and Lina Bobardi. And Lina Bobardi is inside the pages of this black sculpture from Fernanda Fragateiro, so it actually connects these 2 works. But the work here is part of Céline Condorelli, is part of a project called Tools of Imagination, which, as I said, was over a decade long, and that centered on her research, her artistic research in the Netherlands to a large extent, looking at the work of Aldo van Eyck in creating gardens and sculpture parks, so to say, but that were actually for children to play. So he did numerous of them that they were built across the country in the Netherlands. And all of these are these geometric structures that are used by children as games, as play. And as part of that, she also looked at Lina Bobardi's own architecture in Brazil and different experimental projects that would not just have to do with the engagement of children and play, but especially with conviviality and social spaces, so that people from different class structures and communities and backgrounds, intellectual or otherwise, could come together and enjoy their leisure time. So I think that the connections are historically in the case of some of the artists, and in the case of your own work with Constant, but specifically here as it pertains to the ways in which leisure and work have created different kinds of body within one body, and not the body and the way in which we move within a space when we work versus how we move within a space when we are in leisure.
Yeah, so I was very impressed by how the Netherlands is actually constructed around labor, and how the country is actually a work of labor, human labor, of complete transformation of the landscape, organized, for its maximum productivity, as well as the bodies that are living in that space. And with Aldo van Eyck, I think it's great to, has been a lot of work looking into these spaces of play and imagination, because it was a great contrast to the modernist city, to the idea of functionality after the Second War, and the idea of reconstruction of all these destroyed spaces and create another idea of modernism where you will have all the different programs of the city very separated, like where is work, where is home, where is leisure. And, and those spaces that were created by Ido van Eyck, I think has been, a big reference for many people. Within that logic of the city, how do you create a space that is not regulated as much as the rest? But it's still very designed, I have to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, so those are between 48 and 70 something. The same moment, Constant is looking into, also influenced by the situationist, the idea of the homo ludens, is looking into what if society is not organized around labor, but is organized around play. And it designs this entire world like the New Babylon, that is simply a place where to enjoy, play, and it's always in transformation. And it's an architecture without architects, because everyone doesn't have to do anything else than reorganize their own environment depending on their needs. So no one is an architect, because everyone has been transformed into an architect and a designer of their own life and space, which sounds interesting, but actually that's only possible because the city that is elevated is supported by a ground where automated bodies are performing the labor. So this society liberated from labor is only possible because there are bodies that do the labor. In these cases, automated machines in the idea of New Babylon. And I was particularly interested in this painting because New Babylon, Constant did a lot of models of these different iterations of the New Babylon. But then he started to become aware that even in a society will be organized around pleasure and leisure, conflict will arise nevertheless. And he abandoned the idea of the models and started to work with painting. And this, I asked Mark Wigley, who has written extensively about New Babylon.
Commissioned by
Yeah,
Meli, the
commissioned by
institution that I
Meli,
directed
indeed.
way a long time
Exactly.
ago. You
That's
may know
such an important,
the work of Bartomeu Mari, who used to be the director of MAGBA.
An incredible show, by the
He
way.
commissioned, he organized with Mark Wigley the most important show to date of Constant at Kunstinstitut Meli
Yes.
back in the 90s.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
So it's incredible.
what I
actually.
like about this is because suddenly he starts painting violence within New Babylon. At the beginning, everything was play and partying, but then suddenly it started to appear bodies that are subject to violence. And here you see a body that it could be identified perhaps in a normative way as a female body, but is wired. So you don't know exactly if that's a human body or it's a machine or it's something in between. And this ambiguity was leading the entire pavilion around the advent of new technologies. And I'm not going to tell more because this was 2018, but now
You have to see the movie.
we are all on that. But
I
yeah,
think
that's
that,
the idea, like
Yeah.
pleasure, but also the idea of architecture without architects. In the case of Constant, was also
Yeah.
present.
How strange that this project is also so technical. I mean, it's 2018 and it's already picturing, in a way, a lot of the struggles or narratives that we hear by the doomers of AI, like the Doomer Group, which is like the once again Silicon Valley, no? That it seems very, this pavilion in all its different cubholes and spaces, and with Constant seems very attuned.
The thing is that my argument then was the Netherlands was a laboratory of what was to come.
Which, considering the port and automation, is a case.
Yeah, in certain ways.
So to go back to the Celine Condorelli project, that is partial. I mean, we see these two pieces that were acquired by Julia Sarmento. And again, I'm not sure if Celine mentioned this last weekend, but for her, the acquisition was very important because it was the first time that she was exhibiting in an art fair. And she talked about it. Okay, great. So I won't say it, or should I say it? She was exhibiting in an art fair in Italy, in Torino, maybe? I think it was
Ahí
in
va.
or if you're in Torino.
I knew.
Está bien, está bien, está bien. And during this with Vera Chavez, and it was the first time that they were working together, that she was exhibiting in an art fair for the first time. She was like, well, will my work sell? And comes Juliao and acquires the work. So for the artist, it's an important time that it's like a first purchase. And this is why I wanted to mention it, but also because these are drawings that are also related to the tools for imagination and to ultimately what is part of like the massive project that consists of this, because there's many different iterations within the research and within the work, is a playground in London. So I think a children's playground in the city of London. So I think that the beauty of this connecting between work and leisure play. But what I wanted to say is the difference between the futuristic technological city of the Dutch pavilion and then the Vatican pavilion. No, I mean, it's staged where the contrast of the lights, meaning it's theatrical, and you can only do that with the amount of technology that we have today, and such is the case. But in the end, it's completely disconnected from. It's like an analog project.
It is.
Meaning it focuses on like.
Because the entire biennial curated by Carlo Ratti was about new intelligences. There were many robots, artificial intelligence, and in a way we didn't position ourselves against them, but in a way that there was this many other intelligences that are there.
So maybe this is a good transition to another of the projects of Marina, that again, there is this intersection of art and architecture, and it's not exactly an exhibition, nor is it a film, nor is it an artwork, but it kind of mixes all of them together, which is a new project that Marina presented and also created in collaboration, which I have to say is that in the arts, in the field of visual arts, we have grown very attached, associated, I would say, to notions of Kantian autonomy. No? We have been very attached to the idea of authorship when in relationship in the way in which many of the architecture firms develop work, whether they're curators or architects, it's so collaborative. And of course, you have the Starchitects, no? The single author kind of auteur architecture, which is a label, but there's so much more collaboration, I would say, in the field of architecture and art. And I would love if you could bring us into the Venice General Exhibition to show us the work with quantum computer futuristic world, which again, in the case of this project, Marina will tell us, it's happening at the same time as the Vatican Pavilion in Biennale de Venezia, but this is in the general exhibition. So you had a double participation there, and again, not art, not architecture, something in between. But tell us about this, because it's really connected very closely also to a long-standing research that Marina has done around new technologies and the impact that they have in the environment, but also in this case in built construction, in built environments, not just in natural environment, but built environment. Yeah.
So this was the original participation I had in Venice before I received the call from Anna and Tolentino and so on. And it was an exhibition in the Arsenale. And I've been working with scientists for a while. I mean, I think that the 2018 Dutch Pavilion, in a way, showed a lot of my intentions that then have been developed in different ways around the relation of new technological transformations and how they affect the world, communities, ecosystems, and how they transform regimes of labor, ways in which we inhabit the space. And obviously, when I was working with scientists in a few other projects, I heard that there will be a new quantum computer arriving in Spain. And it was this IBM, very beautiful IBM Quantum 2 computer. I don't have any clue about quantum technology, so just to be clear. So I said, oh, well,
It's
maybe.
the AI.
Yeah.
It's basically, I mean, it's like the superpower and super fast stock market, AI content, todo eso. Es como, it takes us to another world, no?
Yeah, but I was
Or am I
interested
wrong?
because it's using a completely different from, it works with AI, but it's not based in the same technology. And to me, it was very interesting. Well, I wanted to do something around the computer, and they said, that's too complicated, it's IBM, the vast government, scientists. I said, okay, can I follow the construction of the building? And they were like, okay, yeah, that you can do. So to me, it was very interesting to follow the construction of the building that will host the computer, because it was these two worlds. On the one hand, this super sophisticated machine that promises to unveil new understandings of the world and matter, or how we are made of, and dimensions, ideas of time and space. And on the other hand, the very basic construction work with matter, with
Where it will be placed.
will be placed. But it needs that building to work, to exist, because in order to create these quantum states, you need to protect that computer with layers of architecture and climate. So, so the idea of the project was to just to follow the construction. And that's what we did with Manuel Correa. He's a filmmaker, a Colombian filmmaker who has worked with forensic architecture for a while. He's a fantastic filmmaker. I'm just happy to try to explore other languages. And I show you a little bit of the stills of the film. And this is the installation in Venice. So it resembles a little bit the structure of the computer, as not finished structure, almost like the skeleton. And on the one side, you have the film that is around 20 minutes. And then the other side, it's showing some 3D animations of the core. Obviously, to me, it was a bit weird to have these two participations in the Venice Biennial. On the one hand, the Vatican Pavilion, and another one about quantum. So sometimes I had conversations with Tolentino and his team about, do you think they are connected? Maybe, you think about religion, like the Holy Spirit and so on, it's a bit quantum, no? Because it's like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in one. It's almost these quantum states. And they were laughing, but to me, it was interesting to work in these two projects that are so different in certain ways. But at the same time, they were connected profoundly with some of my own ways in which I understand architecture. And I wasn't trying to mystify the quantum computing, rather the opposite, no? I was trying to demystify technology, to show the kind of banality and the daily activities that are necessary for these technologies to operate in the world.
So I want to go back, because the first time that I was so impressed with the way in which Marina was treating the field research and the academic research that she was doing in the field of architecture, but instead of presenting it in a didactic, information-driven way, which is how many of the exhibitions surrounding architecture introduce, it's either maquettes or just a lot of information, lists and images and graphs and such. The first time that I saw a very different way in which she had created a new collaboration that tested new forms of sensorial, making sensorial a research that is complicated, was precisely in the Basque Country as well. And I'll let her speak about it, but this is connected not just with technology, but specifically again with how to work with scientists and to think with scientists in which a general public who has little to no information about how technology is, we just use our devices, but what is the impact that they have in our environment? What is this whole thing about AI and water and droughts that we read in the newspapers? Why is there a direct link between climate action, climate change, and artificial intelligence? Was presented in a very eloquent way, again, in an exhibition that was between architecture as a structure and science. And again, it's not art, it's not architecture, it's not an exhibition, but it contains all of these display elements the same. So maybe you can tell us about that project in El Matador.
Yeah, it was, I think,
Matadero.
a transformative project because, I mean, it's the first time that I was working on something more connected to an artwork, but it's still a prototype of something. And I was telling Sofia today, I feel very, naive talking about these things because my field of work is architecture. And then I'm trying to work in film and then other realms where I don't have the experience, but what I don't mind taking risks. I don't mind, making mistakes because I'm trying to explore another language that perhaps is less, you call it didactic, I don't know, maybe information rich in a more, intellectual way, I'm trying to find other ways of expression that it's not by immediate, but I'm learning from others, let's say. So this is a very little video that explains the origin of this project and also the origin of the quantum project. I will explain. So I was doing research on data centers because for a long time I was working with archives. That is something that we were discussing in the context of this exhibition, what it means to take care of works, have an archive, look with archives. So when I was at the New Institute, I worked with one of the biggest archives of architecture, but we were digitizing the materials. So I was also interested in what happens with the digital materials where all this information is stored. And that's how I started to be obsessed with data centers. I've been going to many places around the world that are data centers, but also scientific laboratories that work with a lot of information. So this is Atlas. It's a supercomputer, not quantum, but supercomputer in the Basque Country, and it's used by scientists to do, for example, simulations of the origin of the universe. This is the origin of the universe, which I don't understand very well. I found it beautiful.
A whole building that does this, no? I think
And you require huge data sets to create this image, but as most of us, we don't understand what is going on. They do something a bit more like render something that we feel closer to the ideas that we have about the universe. But in order to create these beautiful images, this is not mine. This is the scientists doing their beautiful video, even the music. But in order to do that, they need this. It's like this computer working 24/7 with a lot of energy, using water for refrigeration and created a lot of heat. And in this case, the heat has to be taken outside so the computer doesn't work, malfunction. Yeah. And they do it with these fans. That's like the air is 50 degrees, so it's quite hot. And this is the situation. So this is where Atlas is, behind this wall. And they just throw the heat into this garden around the laboratory, the supercomputing center. With the bad luck for this loquat tree, that most of the heat goes to this tree, and it blooms or like fruits earlier in the year because it's confused, things that is in another season. And all the scientists know because they can collect the fruits earlier than usual. And when they told me the story, I was like, wow, okay, this is an anecdote, but did you think about the larger consequences? You see how computation affects warming of the planet and how it affects biological life. So what I propose the scientists is like, why don't we do a different relation between computation and biological beings, something that will be more symbiotic. And I used some of the ideas that I gathered through my field work, and we did together this prototype that was presented and commissioned by Tabacalera. So basically it's a film.
Tabacalera, es El Matador, Tabacalera.
Yeah. It's a film with documents and then this prototype. So basically, this is almost replicating, not in the same capacity, but the supercomputers. So there are small computers, Raspberry Pi, and each of them working in this network managed to run the simulation of the universe origin. A lower capacity than Atlas, but something quite okay. And in doing this, each of them reaches almost 70 degrees Celsius in some point. So what we do is that heat, we transfer or redistribute the heat to this metal plate. So all these points that are very hot, we distribute the heat. And instead of throwing it outside, we put it to the other side that is a vermicomposting machine to make compost. So basically,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you enter the gallery, you see this. Que está so in the back is in.
so it's a lot of work that comes into a year of traveling. I learned about compost and in Sweden, but then all this research, instead of trying to explain it, to kind of show it with this machine. So what happens is that the worms and microorganisms like the heat, like about 24 degrees, that is what the soil gets, and they start digesting the soil and creating fertile compost. So the simulation of the origin of the universe is actually creating fertile soil that is the origin of life in a more primal form. And it's funny because I didn't explain it, but in a way, there was also a cautionary tale saying that we continue doing this, like with computation, probably at the end, the only living beings that will exist on Earth will be machines, worms, and microorganisms, no more.
But I think that this is and again, once, I mean, I don't know if you all go to see exhibitions of architecture. We just went to the Burle Marx, and it's architecture with artists and their projects. But again, I think that there's so many ways to understand also the impact of architecture and technology, because the whole, the primary, like the technique, the ways in which we have been constructing buildings for so long seems to be the way that will be with this future machine, no? So this contrast that is always there, I think it's great. And Marina's research has, as I said, has all these very different exhibition formats and presentations. And again, all the past and the future are sharing that same space. And just to close tonight, because she has all these wild ways of working, she is developing right now another film with Manuel Correa, who's a collaborator with Quantum, the Colombian artist and architect and filmmaker. Well, I don't know if, he got his architecture degree from.
No, he's not an architect.
He's
but
not,
he has been working with we call him an honorary architect.
An honorary architect. He's been working with a whole crowd there. Okay, so she is, all this research has also taken her to research lithium, which is one of the projects also begun, back in the day of the New Institute, and the relationship, again, with climate change and extractivism. And you will tell us more about the new film that you're working on that's actually shot in north of Portugal.
Yes.
So I think it's very nice to know that. So,
but it's I think the conversation that was happening last week or when here about long-term processes in working on the same project for a long time.
yeah.
And
So-
to me, it happens the same.
Yeah, many artists, whether that's Filipa Cesar, who presented also last week and is part of the exhibition with this video on downstairs, over a decade also working on an archive of film, the collection of Vilao Sarmento being an archive itself, where a number of pieces are drawn for. So we talked a lot about the archives that led also to Marina's own working of this. But
So to contextualize, in my work on technologies, labor, and so on, I was interested in all the supply chain of these technologies. And suddenly there was this lithium mining. And lithium is very important for electric vehicles, batteries, but it's something very interesting because it talks about the energy of the planet, but also of our bodies. And it's something that is used for the green transition for batteries. So we keep on consuming as much as always because we have these elements, but it's also connected to mental health because it has been used for centuries for health-related issues like mania, what has been called mania, or depression, or bipolar disorder, and exhaustion. So I did an exhibition with Anastasia Kubrak in the Netherlands around lithium and this double side of lithium. And Filipa Ramos, when she was director of the Galeria Municipal de Porto, invited me to do another exhibition on lithium, but focusing on Portugal. Because I'm from Galicia, I'm very close to the north of Portugal. So this is the exhibition that we did then with the communities in Covas de Barroso and, explaining what will be the implications of lithium mining in the north with Carlos Irijalba, Susana Suarez, and, many other artists. But I did exhibition in the Netherlands. There's an exhibition in Porto, a book about lithium extraction in Atacama. I just published a book about lithium and lithium waters in Portugal and Galicia. And I'm not satisfied. I'm trying to find the language to tell the stories and to, make you care for these people and this situation. So I said, okay, I try with film. So now I've been filming in Bande, that is in the Orense, in las Termas de Bande, and many other places around the border between Portugal and Galicia. Also the traditions of the carnival, in a way, somehow embodying the mountain, to protect the mountain in certain ways. So this was a few months ago, like maybe 1.5 months ago, filming. And also I'm a bit obsessive, so I filmed with an actor that is called Marina Otero, who is not me. And we met because we share name and people
invite one
another
to give a lecture.
So I also wanted.
The other is an actress, actually,
So we work with the municipal band in Bande. This is Vidago, and this is Hotel Avenida. That is one of the hotels that keep on being abandoned. We also went to Fonte Campillo. So we were interested in the, lithium waters have been known since before the Roman times, and people have been drinking them or bathing on them for health. But this is also an industry that from 19th century is connected to labor as well, because in the moment of industrialization made society feel exhausted. These waters, these balnearios, these treatments came as, to make people recover so they could continue to work. And it's the same now. So for a while it was also in decay, and now because of the industry of wellness, and we are all tired, all these industries are getting to be popular again. In the case of Avenida, it's because they don't know who is the owner. But the Vidago Palace that is next door, is a 5-star hotel, attracts people, and they are trying to renovate the Fonte Campillo
And what are we looking at here?
This is the bottles. So the lithium is used for, the thermal experiences, but it's also bottled. And this is Fonte Campillo, but, all this region has Vidago and Pedras Salgadas that you all have. It's like one of the most famous waters in Portugal and contains lithium. And that's, this is Marina digging,
That's you.
That's me with all entroido mask. And I can show maybe a few images from the film just to finish. This is rough cut, doesn't have color or edition or sound and these are the band from Bande that is made of Portuguese and Galician, and they are talking freely about the waters. This is Marina Otero, the other Marina Otero. Well, and I leave you there. But so the idea is to, yeah, attempt to try to tell a story or a case that I've been working on since almost, 7 years, and I couldn't find yet the language to, or I tried different languages to work on, and I'm an imposter, like working in film, but in a way, like very, with a lot of curiosity and learning from other mediums. So I'm not scared of being the idiot in the room that, doesn't know everything about filmmaking, or I'm very interested in understanding how it works, but for me it's very important to learn to tell this same story in a different register, in a way.
I think that it's great. And I wanted to ask you to join me in giving an applause to Marina. And yeah, I think it's really beautiful. And I want to open it to questions, of course, from you or comments, but ideally first questions. I think that, again, just for those that arrive later and miss the introductory words, this program of having someone talked about art and architecture was proposed by Fernanda Freirateiro, who is an artist in the exhibition with a number of works, including the sculpture that here is at the center, and an artist with more works here on the wall. And she's here with us. So thank you, Fernanda, for proposing. And yeah, there's many ways, as I said, that artists in the exhibition relate with architecture and architectural history and theory. And I wanted to bring Marina, who's thinking about architecture in a very different way than from the visual arts, I feel, that we come to think, but that I think that it's interesting to like put it in dialogue with contemporary art. So, are there any questions?
Well, I just make a comment. I think, and thank you so much, Marina, you know me so much, I'm so glad I came. I think you work like an architect. You would find ways of finding solutions for problems. I think. And that's why, for that reason, I feel so close to architects, because as an artist, I really like to find solutions. I love when someone comes to me and says there's a problem, can you help me working all of this as an artist? I'm not an architect. I do it as an artist, and I think you do it as an architect. And sometimes we cannot see the difference, but, you know, I don't see myself in call as an architect, I don't see you as an artist. You. Okay. But also I want to mention that there was an architect in our company that was not so happy with this.
I know, I heard him, yes.
And but he put this interesting question saying, what about art without artists? And then we went.
Thank you.
No, yeah, I think I'm very optimistic in there are things that I don't talk about that, but all these projects come with forms of activism. So I'm very close to the community of Covas de Barroso and trying to stop somehow the works in the mine. Or in the case of these technologies, I work a lot with communities protesting data centers, and I advise governments and communities to advance new legislation. So it's a bit weird because I'm also using my skills as an architect in a very technical way sometimes. Sometimes it's just a form of support. How can I contribute to this conversation? And at the same time, trying to find other ways of expression that will be not very, perhaps very normative in architecture. But I do agree. I always feel that even if I do film, I do it from the position of an architect. That is my training and the way in which I see the world in certain ways.
Questions? Who's an architect in the room? Okay. Miss Miguel. Do the architects have any comments or questions to Marina, for example? You do. You have a question. Okay, great.
Hi. I want to ask how do you manage your graphical practice with the technical layers and the production of the installation
I didn't hear that well. ¿Cómo?
How do you enact this creativity, this
Oh.
mentorship, the technical layers and the arts installation?
Yeah. So let's say that these projects that are more the prototypes and the films are self-initiated. The one on Tabacalera, no, that was Tabacalera asking me to work, to invite me to work with scientists, and I think that opened up an entire new realm of works. I'm very, very grateful to Clara and the people in Tabacalera. But the others are self-initiated. The one in the Quantum, it was like, oh, there's this opportunity, I can follow the construction, so I want to do it, and then I will think what happens. And then we were invited to show it in Venice, but that was not the first intent. The one with lithium, this movie is also, we want to do it. So it's a kind of a particular economy. I teach in the US, I teach at Harvard, that pays okay. I shouldn't say all this, but I'm okay. People should know. Because no one talks about money and so on. But I teach half of the year. That's, pays well. I enjoy teaching, and that gives me a little bit of leverage to do projects that no one has asked for. And that's great. And that's, what I've been doing. And then these projects pay eventually for themselves, because you end up having a grant or a sponsor or this shown in an exhibition or in the case of the Quantum, is acquired by an institution. So that things at the end is okay. It's an investment, but I don't see it that way. I see that this is a stable, work I have. And then there are things that I want to do, and I want to wait for anyone to ask me to do. And then this curatorial work, I try to do it once a year or once every 2 years maximum, because it's a different investment, I think, from time to care for everyone involved. It's like curating is a lot of care, no? Like, and kind of being part of that large community. This project was very fast, but at the same time very intense. And the Vatican wants to continue, and the new curators that will be announced for the art, they also want all these relations not to stop suddenly, but to carry to the next. So I think, to me, curating is always a space of collaboration, for caring, for a lot of love and support, and I cannot do it all the time because these other projects also related to forms of activism and care that, so in a way, I do a lot of things, but they have different forms of investment, and that's why I try to do the same all the time. So lithium for 10 years, automation and AI, other 10 years. Like, because I cannot invest myself in new things. So it seems that I do many, many different things, but most of the time they are the same thing redone, because it's not that I'm not fully satisfied, but I'm like, oh, maybe, you know, as I keep on working on something, I learn something new, or I find out that my first arguments maybe are not holding on, and that I cannot jump completely to something new. So in a way, I see all of them connected, because otherwise I could not invest such a kind of, time.
So much time for the research.
Time for the research, for the relations, for the things. So I wouldn't start being, someone was inviting me to do research on wind farms, which is connected to lithium. And so I said, I can't, I mean, I can talk about wind farms, and I'm actually working with people protesting wind farms that are my neighbors, but I cannot establish a new collaboration because I still holding, these other collaborations that I think are long-term. So I do a lot of things, but are always the same thing, in a way. And then I have this economy of redistribution of resources between projects.
You know of like people from universities or architects that are involved in this too? Because it's something that is not taught so
Yeah.
much.
In
Maybe in Portugal, but in other countries it's...
Margarita Mendes is very involved in Porto. Tiago Patatas and Godofredo Pereira, I work very closely with all of them, and Susana Caló. So they created a group that is called Grupo de Investigación Territorial, and they have been doing a lot of work, and actually much more closer than me because they are there. And big community, but also every year, so if you want to go, and in August, mid-August, we all gather in Covas de Barroso, and we celebrate, we talk about lithium, we are gathering with the people in the, in Covas and Romainho and the other regions. We swim in the river, and it's very nice. And that's something that we systematically do every year, because somehow forms of activism should go hand in hand with forms of desire, celebration, pleasure. Yeah? So we are the entire year working, especially people from Covas, like trying to legal actions, and then in summer we also take time to get together and enjoy.
One of the sentences we wrote on the walls, and it was chosen by a woman, was, I rather laugh because the laugh is a form of resistance.
Yes, we agree with that.
It's like a huge...
Yeah. In a way, in places where they want you somehow subjected, the form of resistance is keep on desiring, enjoying, and laughing, celebrating.
Well, I think that this is... okay, Joanna?
I think you don't need to define yourself as what you are, as an artist, architect. I think you're a thinker, but on top of that, you're a maker, and you're trying to chase things you love and are fair and loving and close to the ground. And you're very brave and adventurous, and that's very good to get to know your purpose.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
So
thank you
generous.
for that. One more, okay.
Sorry, this is from my point because I exist. I'm interested in your position regarding the implementation of lithium. Because many people are looking now from days around the political position of Europe and how we depend on the extraction of these different abroad. And I see that your work is very much related to the community where these exploitations taking place in Europe. Then we depend on the exploitations that are taking place somewhere else. So I wanted to hear more about
Yeah.
your thinking about this thing that, as she correctly said, as it was intended.
So I started working in Chile. So my main, the start of the project was working in Chile, in Atacama, and I keep on working in Chile with also people protesting data centers. But then I learned that the position of European Union, because it wants to be energy independent, it was trying to open mines in the continent. But again, you see, it's not that I think that we should continue exploiting Atacama or other regions and keep Europe pristine, but the same logics of territories that are sacrifice zones and territories that make money out of it, it's also replicated in Europe as well. So in Chile, most of the environmental implications stay in the country and affecting the people in Atacama, like Atacameños, because they are drying the water bodies. But the added value, how it's generally, is not staying in the country because the batteries are built somewhere else. Same happens in Europe. The mines are mostly in Spain, they are interested, Portugal, Serbia, but the batteries are made in Germany. So I visited a refinery of lithium in the east of Germany, and I was talking with the owner, who actually, that company owns the somehow the rights of exploitation or the use of the lithium that will be extracted from Portugal. And I asked, why you are not opening mines in Germany? You also have lithium. I was like, oh, it's too, polluting. So they prefer to do it here, and then, in Germany they refine it and make the batteries, and that creates the added value. It's not, I don't have anything against Germany. It's just like to think about the logics that are behind. And similarly, it's from the side of the European Union, it's schizophrenic because this region, on the one hand, is made a sacrifice zone for the sake of independence, energy independence. And we all understand that Europe has to do something for protecting itself. So I'm not questioning that. But at the same time, Europe defines this region as a very important ecological space. Actually, Cobas is a World Heritage of Agriculture, and all this region is also acknowledged as very important space, ecological space, because of the waters. And talking with geologists, these two futures are not compatible, because if you open the mines, you make all the waters like circulate differently, you can pollute the waters. So what you are saying is like, if you mine here, this region, the waters will be suffering. And so how come Europe proposes these two different futures? They are not. So I think, to me, these paradoxes are the ones that I want to unveil. And then saying, yes, I agree that we have to decarbonize. I don't have a question about that. I prefer lithium than fossil fuels. But it doesn't mean anything if we don't transform the way in which we work, we produce, we consume, and so on. So, and you can see it's very much tied to certain industries. So the car industry wants to continue producing cars, individual cars, whether it is with gas or with lithium. I think the transformation should be, okay, we make this transformation, but not to keep on consuming the same, but to transform the way in which we move, we consume. So I think, to me, that having the same number of cars, but instead of fossil fuel having Teslas, I don't think that's the solution. So there are many other ways that we can think about the use of resources. So There's many people who says that there is enough lithium already in circulation in our devices, in the batteries that could be, repurposed. But that's not. It says the industry says it's not efficient or economically viable. But when they open a mine, most of the times they don't include in the Excel sheets all the externalities that the mine is producing. So I think those are the questions that to me are important to point out. But I'm always, it's a difficult terrain because if I'm against lithium, it seems that I'm paid by the lobbies of, oil in a way. So it's a fine line, but it's interesting.
No, creía que yo quería cerrar. Ah, in the MIT. Wow, I didn't know. Wow. Ah, yes, also. Sí. Pues porque fueron de la colonia. Mira.
I don't know that much, but I mean, yeah, that story is terrifying. I didn't know that he was working in those areas. The thing to me is that I'm a bit hesitant to put all my expectations in a new technology. Because if you think about the consumption of energy over the last 100 years, it's only growing. So despite the fact that we've moved from coal to oil to, solar and nuclear, it's not that the advent of a new source of energy has caused the consumption of energy to drop. So it might be something revolutionary, but my question will be, will that make us to consume less? I don't know. And so then what is the outcome of that compulsive desire? No, this is how I frame it. It's a compulsive desire for more energy. You know Michael Marder, he lives in I invited him, he couldn't come, but I'm very interested in his work around energy dreams, like this idea of how we conceive energy as something that we continuously lack, and we always try to find and destroy everything in between to find that. So I'm excited to know what will happen with nuclear fusion, but what I know, looking at history, is that if there is a leverage with a source of energy, it will not be necessarily for, in general, to be more ecological. It will actually allow for, to be used in countless forms that are not necessarily for the benefit of the majority of the population. It's the same right now. All the data centers require more energy. They are creating new solar farms, wind farms. So it's renewable energy, but still it's used for an industry that is not sustainable and probably will end up being a boom. And it's not made for the benefit of the majority of the population right now. It's for the benefit of a few companies. So I think energy in its own, only a source of energy, even if it's very efficient and very magical, is not the only solution. So that's what I think, that the experience that I have in the realm of my work, but maybe I'm mistaken. I don't know.
I would like to close now, but I will mention that in some of the first lectures that began getting a lot of notoriety and press that you were making was one that captured you in the cover of that newspaper. I don't know if it was in Chile or in Spain. That Marina said, because she's talking about consumption patterns, that's what we have to diminish, right? Like rethink consumption rather than just extraction. And in the cover of the newspaper was Marina being quoted from her lecture with a big image saying, taking a selfie, if I take a selfie today, I'm having an impact in climate change or something.
I mean, journalists always find a way of
But it was like a scandal image presenting the theory that all these selfies that we're taking, basically all the consumption of information that we think in the cloud is actually in those data centers, right? Meaning it's not like, oh, those big companies. It's like we are naturally on a daily basis producing the information that is being kept in the data centers, and it's rubbish, right? So I think that that's a type of consumer pattern that, like the one of the cars instead of public transportation, like those are the type of, if you're gonna design a city, can you design a city that's for pedestrians to walk and to get connected, or with public transportation? So I think that it's again shifting the problem or shifting the solutions in a realm that has to do with not the productive sector, but the consumer sector, the sector of the consumer. But it's very nice. Yay!
Thank you so much.
And it's exhausting, so many hours of asking me questions. I hope that you're okay. But thank you so much for coming.